You guys remember that article a while back that claimed that if millennials just stop buying, $4 coffees and avocado toast, then they might actually someday afford a home. Well, of course, we had a lot of laughs about that. It was widely mocked for a suggestion that millennials essentially just wasted their money on frivolous bullshit when we could, of course, be saving for homes. Now, multiple articles, videos came out pointing out that, hey, man, this is the real cost of, that millennials have to bear. And one of those things that were mentioned was student loan debt. Now, to back up this argument that it's not because we're buying bullshit is a new study from, ironically, the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve looked at this and they decided, you know what? We see this article. We see all the blames towards millennials. We're going to actually look at the numbers. All right, let's run the numbers. Now, this is where Z. Jelani of The Intercept comes in. He wrote that in a paper published last week by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, 5 researchers offered an explanation for declining home ownership rates among millennials that does not require blaming them for eating avocado toast. Now, they looked at what they call 9 student cohorts. They concluded that the increase in public tuition and resulting student debt can account for anywhere between 11 and 35% of the decline in home ownership for 28 to 30-year-olds in the years between 2007 and 2015. Now, that's interesting. So student loans, they're kind of a big factor when it comes to why you can't afford a home. I mean, you want to take out a mortgage when you also have a $500, or $500 or more a month student loan payment. Well, for a lot of people, that can be just too much, right? It's too much to take on. Also, student loans can count towards your debt ratio. So if you go to get a loan and you've got $30,000 in student loan debt, and you're paying, even if you're on an income-based repayment plan, you're only paying $250 a month, which is still a lot, out of a $500 payment. Well, that $500 still shows up as one of your expenses that you have to pay, meaning that it adds to your debt ratio, which will make it a little harder for you to actually be able to get that loan, because they look at your debts, they look at your assets, and they say, can you afford to pay this a month? What if something happens? It all goes into your risk assessment for getting a mortgage. So that's how one of the reasons that student loans can be very detrimental. The other is, well, you can't afford it. You just don't have that money available. That's the other problem here. Now, they note, the study does, that relative to the 2001 age 22 cohort, the mean age 28 to 30 home ownership rates for the 2009 age 22 cohort is approximately 7.74% lower. So, basically, a lot of millennials were getting stuck with all the student loan debt, and that's making it very, very hard to, for us to get homes. And so that's reflected in the downturn of home ownership. Okay. So, I mean, there it is, right? There's the study. Student loan debt is hurting people's ability to afford homes. Now, a lot of you are filing this under no shit. We already actually kind of knew that. At least those of us who have to live with this debt. So now, why do people want, if we know that getting this debt is a big problem and that it's leaving us unable to afford homes and families in the future, then why are we continuing to get that debt? Well, Jelani writes, the paper also finds that there isn't a significant relationship between increasing tuition and the number of students seeking higher education. And he says it's perhaps a sign of the increasing necessity of higher education in attaining living wage work. Now, that I think is something that a lot of people who criticize millennials don't understand. Okay. That, for example, for the older generation, that bank job you hired in at 18 in 1975, well, it will now require a minimum of a bachelor's degree. There are numerous jobs like that, where people will get in, fresh out of high school or off the factory floor back in the 80s and the 70s. A member of my family has a similar story. Worked the floor for 10 years, got booted up to management. And took classes after getting into management, but generally there was a lot more room for advancement back then. Nowadays, no, there's no room for advancement. And you either hire in with that, with that degree and that experience, or you stay in a lower position and, for the rest of your life, if you're lucky enough to hold that job for that long. Okay. So that's a bit of a problem. Okay. Look, there's even degrees for becoming a secretary, which used to be considered entry-level work. And a lot of people still consider that entry-level work. But really, now you have to have either a degree or like 10 years of experience in order to get one of those jobs. Now, how do you get that? Well, a lot of people, millennials are like, okay, well, I can't get the experience because nobody's going to hire me. Maybe I can do an unpaid internship and get the experience in that way. So you work, but you're not getting paid for that work. So that's a problem. No wonder we can't afford homes, right? But you got to do something, right? Which explains that another thing that this study found. It explains that why the students' price elasticity of demand for higher education is actually quite low. Now, what that means is that as college costs increase, American students do not forego education, but instead amass more debt. Because they look at it and say, well, look, it's expensive, it's getting more expensive, but I got to have that education if I'm going to have even a little bit of a chance of getting a good job. One that actually pays more than $10 an hour, one that pays more than $15 an hour. Okay, because again, 15 should be the base that you live on, and it's the base that you can live on in many places, and even in some places, it isn't. And for example, in LA, in order to get a 2-bedroom apartment, it costs over $100,000. I mean, you need to make over $100,000 to be able to make payments on that apartment, make your rent, without it taking over half your income. That's insane. Now, there's another finding in this report, which says the researchers say shouldn't distract policymakers from that first point that we just went over. Now, they say that to the extent that the ongoing defunding of public education, of public higher education, has not been met, according to these estimates, by significant declines in educational attainment, some policymakers might be tempted to infer that defunding public higher education is costless. So basically what they're saying is that as the states have defunded, have stopped putting money into public universities, and they shift those costs over to the student more and more, those students aren't saying, well, fuck it, I'm just not going to go to college. No, they're taking on more and more debt. So these policymakers are like, well, you know what? Defunding public education hasn't stopped people from going to school. So let's just keep defunding it. And we'll keep shifting that burden over to the student. And who cares if they get higher student loans? I'm not in that business. I'm in the business of saving money for the state. Probably so I can give tax breaks to the rich. Now, however, the people in the study write, our estimates include that the cost of shifting the burden of funding higher education onto the student may arrive with a lag, early home ownership, and our empirical models appears responsive to the costs of higher education. This leads to the researchers to a final conclusion. They said that the evidence points to a final policy opportunity to stimulate youth home ownership over the long run. And what do they suggest? They suggest funding state higher education. Now, I think that would actually go a long way. Again, one of the reasons that it's gotten so expensive for the student is to shift away from funding through taxes to, guaranteed student loans. The states, of course, used to use tax money to fund higher education to be able to keep down the cost for the student. Since they've shifted away from that, and we've shifted more to a model of student loans, now especially that the government is a guaranteed student loan provider, well, these universities and these colleges are like, shit, man, we could raise our rates, our prices way up. And they'll still come because they'll still get that money from the federal government. It's a cash spigot. It's not going to shut off. Let's take advantage of that. And there's a reason that some of them take more advantage than others. There are for-profit schools, of course, that, for a while, at least until Obama shut it down, that were getting federal student loans. Now, Betsy DeVos is, of course, she might have either already overturned that or is planning on doing that because she's all for the for-profit corporations, the for-profit schools, private schools, all that stuff. But The reason that a lot of colleges take in more of that money is so that they can make their campuses better. Now, I'm not against that specifically because they want to attract the highest the best students, right? They want to attract the top students. Problem is, you're making it unaffordable and you're making people take out massive amounts of debt. So that's a big problem, okay? And look, the big problem here, the big picture that I'm trying to paint for you guys is that colleges back in the day used to be funded a lot by the state. That's why someone in 1975 could go to college and hold down a part-time job and graduate with no debt. But you can't do that anymore. We don't live in that world anymore. And that's one of the big consequences of defunding schools, higher education. Now, of course, will that stop Republicans? Of course not. Republicans for decades have been telling people that, oh, college is bad. It's where the liberal elites come from. It's gotten so bad that now almost half of all Republicans believe that college hurts the country. So people that go to college and the colleges themselves, that's hurting America. So in Republican-controlled states, expect to see more and more defunding of public universities, and we've already seen a ton of that anyway. So cutting those to the bone, and of course that makes it so that college is even more expensive, and that's why people take out more and more loans, and that's why people unfortunately can't afford homes. This is a result of that, and that's of course why local elections also matter. And of course, it's also why we need to do some action at the local level and at the federal level. Now, right now, under Trump, we can't do a damn thing. But if the Democrats could win, but let me tell you how they could win. Maybe if they run in things like a living wage, Medicare for all, most importantly to this topic, debt-free college. That might actually get a few people to get out and vote for Democrats. Because restoring federal funding to universities to ensure that no student has to take out loans to get an education would actually do a lot to solve this problem. That is one of the real solutions. Not blaming students, and certainly not blaming avocado toast. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.